Top O of the morning, Dan and Amy, and we're broadcasting live this morning from Joe Cotton Ford in leafy Carroll Stream, Illinois, DuPage County.
Oh yeah, heavenly
Back,
God's country.
back home. And the reason we're here is because Joe Cotton Ford's a great business, and also because Joe Cotton Ford is one of our signature sponsors for the Freedom Summit coming up November 11th, which features a number of renowned and profound thinkers.
Yeah, it's our biggest event of the year, Freedom Summit 2017, and tickets have gone on sale. Go to freedomsummitchicago.com. But the reason why you're going to want to buy these tickets, we have author and filmmaker Dinesh D'Souza, also appearing retired Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. Larry Elder will be there. I heard Dan Proft's going to be there.
He's very good. It's good stuff.
He's the best. I mean, really,
I enjoy his work.
You're going to want to see Dan Proft. But go to freedomsummitchicago.com. And also, please stop by. We're here at Joe Cotton Ford this morning, here until 9 o'clock this morning. Address is 175 West North Avenue, Carroll Stream, and enter for your chance to win tickets to Freedom Summit. And also stop by and say hi. Pick up yourself a car.
And now we've got somebody who's going to stop by and say hi remotely, but nonetheless, he just was mentioned as one of the premier appearance at Freedom Summit. He is Dinesh D'Souza, noted author and filmmaker and academic. We've had him on the show before, and I always recount I first became aware of D'Souza. He was like a zygote, and he had written his first book called Illiberal Education. He was speaking on the campus of Northwestern University, where I was an undergrad behind enemy lines, and been following his career and his work for the ensuing 2.5 decades. So it is always a pleasure to talk to Dinesh D'Souza, who joins us now. He is the author of the new book, The Big Lie, Exposing the Nazi Roots of the American Left. Of course, this stands to be another New York Times bestseller. Dinesh, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to be on the show.
So I guess the premise of your book is somewhat self-explanatory, but the historical context is important in these times. So paint the premise of your latest offering.
Well, we saw this starting in Charlottesville, but also earlier with Trump's election, this whole campaign, a frenzied campaign to portray Trump as a fascist, to portray the Republicans, the conservatives, as the neo-Nazi party. And behind this is a very big idea that fascism and Nazism are supposedly on the right. And so this book is a challenge to that. And it not only shows decisively that fascism and Nazism are on the left, they're essentially ideologies of massive centralized state control. But moreover, there is a deep and sordid history continuing to the present that links, if you will, the Democratic Party and the progressive left with fascism and Nazism. For example, I expose in the book that George Soros, the kingmaker of the Democratic Party, the funder of the so-called anti-fascist or Antifa movement, actually has direct ties to Nazism. He was a sort of Nazi collection boy in World War II. He would go into Jewish neighborhoods, confiscate Jewish property, turn it over to the Nazi regime. Now, this is not my opinion of the matter. Soros admits it, and he also admits that he has no regrets about it.
So what has he done with the items that he's collected, and how did you find out that information?
Well, there's a very revealing interview just a few years ago with Steve Kroft of CBS News. It was a profile of Soros, and almost incidentally in the interview, Steve Kroft said to Soros, "Hey, Soros, isn't it true that when you were a teenager, you and a bunch of other guys would go into Jewish neighborhoods, confiscate Jewish property, and turn it over to the Nazi regime, which ruled at that time Soros' native country of Hungary?" And Soros acknowledged that he did that. And when he was asked, he was obviously a young man then. I'm not so much faulting him for what he did then. What I'm faulting him for is when Kroft says to Soros, "What do you think now about what you did?" Soros basically says, "Listen, all that bad stuff was going on anyway. I didn't create it. I merely took advantage of the situation." So think of the deep amoralism of this. I mean, if anyone in the Trump administration had this kind of direct tie to Nazism and was unrepentant about it, there would be a media uproar. But interestingly, Soros is being protected by the left. I mean, no articles in NPR, no exposés in the New York Times. It's almost as if Soros gets a pass because he's their favorite Nazi.
One of the points of order on the issue of Nazism and fascism generally is, and we had this actual discussion last week with Alan Dershowitz, is that in order to be a fascist, you need the complicity of intellectuals because fascism rolls everything up into the state. And so Trump, even if it were his inclination, just for the sake of argument, he can't be a fascist because he doesn't have support and control in academia and the arts and Fortune 500 boardrooms. All of these civic institutions that become the state in a fascist state. And one of the points that's lost about the rise of the Third Reich is it was intellectuals. It wasn't the banality of evil argument that Hannah Arendt makes about ordinary Germans folding in. It was intellectual leadership. There's books, one I'm thinking of in particular, I think Ingraio is the author's name, Hitler's Intellectuals, that talks about essentially those leading lights of civic institutions that were responsible in part for what occurred in Nazi Germany.
Well, you're quite right that while the leading philosopher of the 20th century, Martin Heidegger, was a member of the Nazi Party and a supporter of Hitler. But I think the broader point you're making is very profound, and that is that what is most dangerous is not the fascism of the street, not even these Antifa thugs who, even as of yesterday, were beating up people at Berkeley. The real fascism, the dangerous fascism, is the fascism of the institutions, by which I mean the media, academia, Hollywood, the whole world of entertainment. Now, the Nazis had a term called Gleichschaltung, which basically means coordination. It means bringing the whole society into line with a single ideological perspective. And we have Gleichschaltung in America. It's called political correctness. The guys at Google who will throw you out if you don't conform to sort of, you may say, company ideology. The Hollywood bosses who will drive you out of that town, make sure you never work again. The deans who control billion-dollar endowments. These are the truly dangerous people because they have real power. The neo-Nazis and ragtag white supremacists in Charlottesville, they have no power.
Well, and just picking up on that point, you know, the Martin Heideggers versus the Martin Niemöllers, and who are you in this society, right? What's particularly disturbing to me is those who are voluntarily folding in, like this Catholic school that made news out in California, San Domenico, that's removing all of its Catholic iconography, its statues and whatnot, to be more inclusive, essentially renouncing its faith. I mean, the bulwarks against totalitarianism, family and faith, and we seem to be, in certain quarters, renouncing the importance of those institutions.
Yes, I think we see here the power of the left in culture. I mean, Trump won the election. The Republicans may control 2 out of the 3 branches of government, but the real power of intimidation is on the left. And so it's media, it's Hollywood, it's comedians. Look at the way that Trump is slayed on every platform. Now, what I find ironic is these same people keep calling Trump an authoritarian. They say he's a fascist like Mussolini. Now, if it was really Mussolini ruling America, he would send his black shirts into the New York Times. They would shut the place down in 15 minutes and take it over. That's how real fascists act. So the charge against Trump is fake. It's bogus. And that's what I mean when I use the term the big lie. The big lie is the transfer of blame for the people who are actually carrying out fascist tactics and who actually have a statist fascist ideology, transferring the blame or the responsibility for fascism onto the Republicans and onto the right, which is actually the anti-fascist party.
Now, recently you spoke to a group of college students and conservative students to keep up the fight, and you believe that they will win. Why?
Well, these young people are kind of a subversive force in academia, and nothing breaks up political correctness better than the sort of disinfectant of truth, but not just truth, but truth carried out in a kind of bold and creative way. So I was trying to encourage these young people not to sort of mindlessly submit to the cultural orthodoxies that are being rammed down their throats, but to be sort of creative rebels, even guerrillas of a sort, undermining these orthodoxies and making space for free speech and for different points of view.
How concerned are you about talking about a little bit about the banal politics of D.C., but important nonetheless? It's certainly part of the cultural fight. How concerned are you about some of the transitions in terms of staffing around President Trump? Are we starting to see the institutional interests, the men and women of always reassert themselves in the Trump administration, and the possibility of quote unquote draining the swamp go by the boards?
I'm less worried about that than I'm worried about the sort of complete kind of invertebrate response of so many Republicans. Look at all the Republican leaders who have basically, responded to Charlottesville by condemning one side and in effect endorsing the left's narrative that the left's own violence is in a sense not something that can be blamed on them. Trump's instincts were right. Trump goes, listen, I mean, I see some bad guys on this side. I see plenty of bad guys on the other side, too. There's a lot of violence coming from both sides. But a lot of Republicans are intimidated by the press. They know that the press has the power to humiliate. And so, as a result, they become weak-kneed, and they tend to surrender, if you will, to the leftist cultural narrative. And I'm glad to see that Trump is not one of them.
Speaking of the leftist cultural narrative, it seems to be getting mainstream. There's a piece in the Chicago Reader you may be interested in. Obviously, it's local, so may not be familiar with it. But it's this hagiographic piece on Chicago Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa, who is a outspoken, identified member of the New Democrat Socialists of America, and the Chicago Reader, which, as you would suspect, is way left. Goes on in glowing terms to talk about the rise of the Democrat Socialist movement of America, its new invigorated status with the Bernie Sanders campaign and everything that's flowed from that. What do you see on the horizon for the Democrat Party in the 21st century with so much of the young progressive left attracted to just basically outright socialism and feeling comfortable enough that it's popular enough that they can so identify?
Well, the remarkable thing is that fascism grew out of socialism. Mussolini was a socialist. He was the editor of the Italian socialist weekly called Avanti. And fascism essentially is national socialism. In fact, that was the name of Hitler's party. It fused nationalism with socialism. So what's kind of ironic is that today we're seeing, if you will, fascist ideology resurrecting itself in a new guise. And of course it is, as the fascists were on the left. This is we also mentioned the media, the Chicago Reader. I almost had to read twice in the Washington Post today. There's a headline which basically says violent Antifa protesters beat up nonviolent Trump protesters. And I had to look twice because it's so rare to see in a mainstream newspaper an actual acknowledgement that the violence is coming from the left. Then I turn to NPR and I see the telling phrase, violence erupts at Berkeley rally. Now, violence erupts is the media's typical phrase when the violence is coming from the left. It's treated like the violence is a volcano. It just erupts. No one actually causes it. It just erupts. So that's NPR doing what NPR does best, which is camouflage the truth.
He is Dinesh D'Souza, the new book, The Big Lie, Exposing the Nazi Roots of the American Left, and he's going to be in Chicago at our Freedom Summit on November 11th. You can get tickets at freedomsummitchicago.com. Dinesh, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen